$2 trillion. Who's expected to pay for President Joe Biden's new infrastructure plan? Holy Week schedule. How the Vatican plans to celebrate another Easter during the pandemic. Opportunities and challenges. The relationship between the Holy See and the Church in Germany. And Polish parishioners. See how they call their 25-mile journey the extreme way of the cross. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, March 31st, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Eric Rosales in for Tracy Sable. Well, fresh off spending $1.9 trillion on his American relief plan, President Joe Biden now wants to spend another $2 trillion, this time on infrastructure. The key question, who will pay for it? White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen.
The White House says the American Jobs Plan will create millions of jobs, but it calls for companies to shell out more in taxes. This as concerns over the rising debt grow by the day.
President Joe Biden boards Air Force One on his way to sell the American Jobs Plan. Among other things, the plan aims to fix highways and bridges, moves away from fossil fuels by installing 500,000 electric vehicle chargers nationwide by 2030, and gets rid of lead pipes and drinking water systems.
It's more than just roads, railways, and bridges. It's also broadband. 1/3 of the country doesn't have access to broadband.
To pay for it, enter the Made in America tax plan. It would hike the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. That would undo President Donald Trump's signature 2017 tax overhaul. He wrote today, this legislation would be among the largest self-inflicted economic wounds in history. If this monstrosity is allowed to pass, the result will be more Americans out of work, more families shattered, more factories abandoned. But the White House contends
he believes that the number of people, the number of companies that didn't pay taxes in the last couple of years is just insane, and most Americans would agree. We need to change that.
Meanwhile, COVID-19 and teenagers. Pfizer announcing that its vaccine protects kids as young as 12 and that it's safe. And this afternoon, Vice President Kamala Harris meets with faith leaders, hoping they can help convince their flocks to roll up their sleeves.
And you all, throughout this time, have, as you always do, been a source of strength, a source of comfort, a source of counsel.
With Easter Sunday quickly approaching and more getting vaccinated, houses of worship expect larger numbers to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus.
With Democrats clinging to control of Congress, the president hopes he can pass the American Jobs Plan by this summer, and he can expect a very difficult fight. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And this week, both the House and Senate are in recess, but lawmakers are still reacting to President Biden's infrastructure plan. Republicans are concerned the massive package could overheat the economy and lead to inflation, while Democrats are telling their colleagues across the aisle, we will pass it with you or without you.
Infrastructure has traditionally been bipartisan. I think the American people know we have to do infrastructure in a new green way.
Last week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer laid out his plan to pass President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package, stating Republicans need to get on board or get off the tracks.
We will try to work with our Republican colleagues on a bipartisan basis when and where we can. We welcome it. But if they choose to obstruct, rather than work with us to deliver the bold help that American families need, we will push forward and make progress nonetheless.
Republicans warn Biden's plan would overheat the economy and lead to rampant inflation. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says, quote, my advice to the administration, if you want to do an infrastructure bill, let's do an infrastructure bill. Let's don't turn it into a massive effort to raise taxes on businesses and individuals. Heritage Foundation economic experts agree it would reduce economic growth.
Increasing the corporate tax rate massively would make businesses less willing to invest, less willing to take risks, and it would also put us at a competitive disadvantage against our biggest competitors globally. This is the last thing we need right now.
And it was just last week that House Republicans warned Biden's transportation secretary that any plan that strays from core transportation, such as tackling climate change or even social justice, the GOP would not support it. Well, late last week, the governor of Arkansas signed a measure to protect the conscious rights of medical professionals. The Medical Ethics and Diversity Act allows doctors to decline to perform non-emergency procedures, which they say would have conscience-based objections to. The measure now takes effect in August. Joining us now is Lewis Brown, Executive Director of the Christ Medicus Foundation, and he's also provided testimony in favor of the measure to lawmakers in Arkansas. Lewis, so welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
All right. So let's get started here of how important is this measure and what sort of specific instances would it help, for instance, Catholic medical professionals?
Right. I think this legislation is very important. The right of medical conscience is a vital civil right that is a pillar for so many of the civil rights that doctors, nurses, and patients enjoy in America. This legislation will really safeguard and protect doctors, nurses, medical students who have experienced coercion or persecution because of their moral, ethical, or religious beliefs. It'll protect particularly surgeons and other types of doctors that feel coercion or pressure to perform medical procedures that they just believe are simply unethical. It will protect pro-life medical centers and pro-life medical clinics to ensure that they're not forced to subvert their pro-life mission. It's vitally important as we see so much of the culture of death on the march in healthcare. It's vitally important that we protect the ethical, moral, and religious convictions of medical professionals so that they can simply do their jobs to care for the sick and the suffering.
And let me ask you this, now that the governor of Arkansas has signed the measure into law, do you think that it will help promote other states to consider similar legislation?
Right. I think that it will. This legislation is going to do many things. It's, of course, going to protect that vital civil right of medical conscience for medical professionals, but it's also going to protect the ability of states to have a healthy workforce, a diverse healthcare workforce, a robust healthcare workforce that we see is so vital to combating public health crisis. And so it protects the medical professionals, but it also protects patients, particularly patients that are materially impoverished, particularly patients who are most vulnerable. And that is so important. We've seen that during COVID-19. I think states are more aware of the need to have a healthy, robust healthcare workforce and to care for the poor and vulnerable. And I'm hoping that this will encourage other states to follow Arkansas's lead.
Exactly. Are there any indications that the Biden administration and other states could actually try to erode conscious rights protections?
Yeah, I think that, where the Biden administration does the right thing to advance the common good, we applaud them. Where they are really decreasing the common good, rolling the common good back, we need to speak out. And their plans would take a juggernaut, really effectively a missile to conscience and religious freedom in healthcare. You see that with the Equality Act that under certain interpretations could be interpreted to compel providers to actually perform abortions. We also know that the Equality Act really undermines so much of the protections that we have from the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. It also would be very coercive to doctors and force them to provide procedures and services that they just believe are bad for the patient, that they believe to be unethical. We also know that the Biden administration's on the record for opposing the Hyde Amendment, which restricts public funding for abortion, which has had support for decades, both on the Democratic side of the aisle and on the Republican side of the aisle. So, I think that tragically, with what the Biden administration says that they want to do on healthcare, and particularly on conscience and religious freedom, it would set back the pro-life movement for generations. It would really destroy faithful Catholic healthcare. And we need to find a place where we can provide for that right to medical care and for the poor and vulnerable, while also protecting the vital civil right of conscience and religious freedom for patients and for medical professionals.
Well, thank you so much, Lewis Brown, Executive Director of the Christ Medicus Foundation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, a report in EWTN's National Catholic Register says that the Vatican is in crisis management mode with Catholics in Germany. The story says in January, the two Holy See cardinals wanted to bring the head of the German Bishops' Conference to Rome. They were seeking to correct him about an interview he gave in which he expressed dissent from church teaching. Joining us now is A.C. Wimmer, editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency Germany. A.C., welcome back. Now, what did the head of the German Bishops' Conference say in the interview, and did the meeting in Rome ever take place?
Eric, good to talk to you about this. Yes, a meeting certainly did take place. And as to what exactly was discussed, of course, is open to interpretation following a pronouncement made by Bishop Betzing, but nothing too much coming from the Holy See. So all that we know is that in terms of what Bishop Betzing was saying, there may have been soundings of encouragement. But when you look at what Pope Francis has in fact said, written, and otherwise provided in terms of feedback, including from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, of course, is rather harsh criticism, which has often been framed as encouragement by those whom that criticism is addressed to, in particular German bishops. So the debate is open. And as to who will finally have the interpretation that will also constitute a decision on these important factors remains to be seen. As a Catholic, I'm sort of pegging my hopes on Pope Francis.
And AC, can you expand a little bit on the latest of Bishop Betzing and the church in Germany in general?
Well, the situation is really so serious that there are increasing calls for Pope Francis to make something of an emergency intervention, or perhaps invite the German bishops to come to Rome, or perhaps come to Germany. That might sound a bit dramatic, but only if you consider that the single issue currently at play is not the wider context. At the moment, Eric, the spotlight is on the question of blessings of same-sex unions. These are demanded by not only German bishops, but also bishops, theologians, priests from around the area, from German-speaking Europe, from Belgium. And yes, they are openly contradicting the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. But if we zoom out and take stock of what Pope Francis is facing, you see that what's playing out is much bigger. What we're dealing with here really is a tension at a tectonic level with Teutonic bishops, with theologians, with a machine of structures and processes really well oiled by the German church tax system. And whilst the Pope has warned about these things, the tension is still ongoing, and it remains to be seen, as you've rightly said, how these things will play out.
Interesting. And let's switch gears a little bit, and we take a closer look at Easter. And what's the status of attending Mass in person in Germany during this coronavirus pandemic?
Oh, it's been nothing short of spectacular. Just before Easter, just before Holy Week, the Chancellor, Angela Merkel, together with the premiers, the state leaders of the different German states, announced that one should not attend Mass or any other liturgical celebration during Holy Week and Easter. And then 24 hours later, they backflipped on that, and now everyone pretty much can, if they want to, attend, provided they stick to the rules that have been successfully in place for a couple of months now. At the same time, there is a plethora of digital offerings available, especially, of course, on EWTN Germany, a German service provided here, and perhaps a bit on CNA Deutsch. But there's also a few other things you can do, provided you stick to the rules. Mass is available. Easter celebrations are taking place, and in many places, of course, with really special traditions that include fires and all sorts of stuff going on.
But people are still taking precautions out there, right? Wearing masks, things like that, social distancing.
Whilst there's not a general rule for everything, in general, you cannot sing at church. You must wear a certain type of specific mask, an N95 or FFP2 mask. You must disinfect your hands. You have about 1.5 meters. I think that's about 6 feet distance to the next person. And there is no communion on the tongue.
Well, you stay safe out there. A.C. Wimmer, editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency Germany. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you kindly, Eric. God bless.
Coming up, presidential politics. What stands out in the Biden administration? And Easter at the Vatican. What you can expect this year. Welcome back. A new study says that among Catholics, those who attend Mass weekly are more likely than others to say a politician who disagrees with church teaching should be denied communion. Pew Research Center finds that 42% of Catholics who attend Mass weekly believe a politician who disagrees with church teaching on abortion should be denied communion. Among all U.S. Catholics, only 29% say a politician supporting abortion should be denied communion. Joining us now is Paul Kengor, professor of political science at Grove City College. Professor, welcome back.
Hey, Eric, good to see you. Thanks.
Now, what do you make of all these findings in the Pew study?
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. So they asked about 4 different categories, right, for denying communion. So one was abortion, one was homosexuality, one was capital punishment, and one was immigration. So the politicians' view on those things. And the only one where the numbers were really even close was abortion. And yeah, I'm glad to see that, right? And the numbers, I believe, were the closest category. Actually, the closest category was based on Republicans. Right? So Republicans were 50 to 49 said that they thought that such a politician should not be denied. So there were 49% in the denied category. That was about the only one where it was almost a majority. And then next to that, it was those who attend Mass weekly, and that was 42 to 55. But other than that, it's not even close. And the number on Democrats, this is off the top of my head, Eric, but I think it was like 15 to 82%. That's Democrat Catholics who are Democrats. So that one's not even close. And probably the most important figure in all of this across the board is that question, Catholics who attend Mass weekly or more. And I could tell you, Eric, I mean, I've followed this for 20, 30 years. That's the most important number. And it's kind of the best measurement of devoutness, piety, regular practice. I mean, whether or not that's flawed or not, understandably. But of all the different predictors, how often you attend Mass usually relates to where you stand on whether or not you think a pro-choice politician should be denied the Eucharist.
Right, exactly. And we're going to switch gears a little bit. So last week, the name Karl Marx was trending on social media's Twitter site, and you wrote a book last year on Karl Marx. Are we starting to see more Marxism in the United States?
Well, it's pretty sad that Karl Marx is trending on Twitter, isn't it? Yeah, so the man died, 1883, so about 140 years almost later, and the man is probably, it is probably more popular than ever in the United States. He was never, believe me, he was never popular in the communist world. He was never popular in the Soviet Union, behind the Berlin Wall, or any of those places. The first chance that the people had in those places to reject communism, they did. But yeah, in the United States, Marxism is quite literally more popular than ever. I could just sit here and rattle off a bunch of really disturbing surveys and data points on the number of young people generally who say, that they believe in the abolishing private property, say they prefer socialism over capitalism. It's really sad. And from a Catholic perspective, look, the Communist Manifesto, Eric, it was published in 1848. And the Church has been warning about communism since Pope Pius IX's December 1846 encyclical Qui Pluribus, and 2 years before the manifesto was even published. So the Church has been warning on this for a long time. And frankly, to see publications like America Magazine, the Jesuit magazine, in July 2019, run articles with titles like "The Catholic Case for Communism," there is no Catholic case for communism. There's a Catholic case against communism, not one for communism.
Well, Dr. Paul Kengor, professor of political science over at Grove City College, thank you so much for joining us.
Anytime, Eric. Thanks. God bless.
Up next, Extreme Way of the Cross. See how Catholics in Poland journey 25 miles to practice their faith. The next few days are the most important in the annual church calendar, and Pope Francis will be busy with services and masses. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. And Colm, can you tell us more about Pope Francis's Easter schedule at the Vatican this year?
Good evening, Eric. I can indeed. Well, the Vatican has published the Pope's schedule for Holy Week at the Vatican, and as you expect, how the liturgies will be celebrated this year will be much more low-key than in previous years due to, of course, COVID-19, with most people watching from home on TV. For example, one of the big changes is the Way of the Cross. Now, this is traditionally held at the Colosseum here in Rome, where up to thousands would gather outside to pray with Pope Francis. However, this year it will take place just behind me in St. Peter's Square, instead with only small groups of faithful allowed to attend. Tomorrow, Holy Thursday, the Pope will celebrate the Chrism Mass in the morning in St. Peter's Basilica, but the Vatican confirmed that he will not preside over the Mass of the Lord's Supper. Instead, Cardinal Giovanni Battista Re, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, he will preside over that Mass instead.
Well, that's still going to be an incredible sight out there. And what about Good Friday?
Good Friday, there will be the Papal Liturgy of the Passion of the Lord at 6 p.m. and then Stations of the Cross with Pope Francis at 9 p.m. as we mentioned in St. Peter's Square. Now, the Pope will offer the Easter Vigil Mass on April the 3rd in St. Peter's Basilica at 7:30 p.m. and he'll also celebrate the Easter Sunday Mass at 10 a.m. after which he will offer the traditional Urbi et Orbi blessing.
And Colm, I understand that the Pope has enlisted the help of some Italian scouts at this year's Way of the Cross.
That's right, Eric. Pope Francis chose a scouting group from central Italy and kids from a Roman parish to prepare the meditations for this year's Way of the Cross. The Agency Follonia Scouts group from Umbria, made up of 145 young people between the ages of 8 and 19. They've composed the meditations for the Way of the Cross with Pope Francis, and as well as that, an additional group of around 500 kids, Eric, from the First Holy Communion and Confirmation classes at the Roman parish of the Holy Martyrs of Uganda. They've also helped to prepare them as well. Now, the Way of the Cross, as we said, will be held at 9 p.m. Roman time on April the 2nd. No public attendance allowed this year. However, the good news is that it will be streamed across all of EWTN's social media and carried live on EWTN television across the world. Eric?
It's a great reminder for our viewers out there. Colm Flynn, EWTN News Rome correspondent. Thank you, Colm.
Thank you, Eric.
Pope Francis says as we move closer to Good Friday, we should remember the Passion of Christ and how it's mirrored the victims of war, violence, and abortion.
Non solo andiamo a pregare, no, andiamo a rinnovare.
The Holy Father offered the remarks during today's general audience. He says, quote, by adoring the cross, we will carry in our hearts and minds the sufferings of the sick and poor. Pope Francis adds, Jesus gives us the certainty that good always triumphs over evil and that life always triumphs over death. Finally, tonight, during this Holy Week, many of us will attend Stations of the Cross. Earlier this month in Poland, some Catholics took that devotion to a whole new level. EWTN's Vatican Bureau Chief Alan Holdren has more.
Behind the door of St. Anthony's Church in the Polish city of Ziemiany, people gather for Mass to begin the prayer of the Stations of the Cross in an extreme way, by walking 25 miles during the night. This is Anya's 5th time walking the near marathon-length Way of the Cross. Anya says that every time she does the Way of the Cross, she feels the great love of God, His grace and closeness. Every time, though, she says is different, and every time, it's a mystery. For the blessing, equipped with prayer books and wooden crosses, the group heads out for the journey. They stop only to whisper the Stations of the Cross. Then they continue on their way, piercing the darkness with their flashlights in quiet prayer. Despite the pandemic, the tradition continues. Silence is the rule. Challenging weather is the condition. Listening to the voice of Jesus in the heart is the key. They call it the extreme way of the cross, the extreme answer to God's immense sacrifice for us. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
Amen. What a beautiful story. Well, we want to thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Eric Rosales. Have a wonderful night, and God bless.